What random act of kindness backfired in the most unexpected way? The GoFundMe. I started to help my homeless neighbor raised $50,000 in 2 weeks. 3 months later, the FBI was at my door, and everyone I'd helped was either dead or in prison. Agent Ramirez showed me photos of children who would never see their families again, all because I thought I was being a good person. I first saw Jerry on a Monday morning in October, sitting against the brick wall outside my apartment complex. Thin, weathered face, military fatigues that looked authentic, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless veteran, anything helps, God bless." Something about his posture reminded me of my dad after he came back from Afghanistan, before the nightmares got too bad. Jerry was always polite when I dropped coins in his cup, never pushy or aggressive like some of the other homeless people downtown. He'd look me in the eye, say thank you like he meant it, sometimes share a few words about the weather, or ask how my day was going. Real conversations, not the desperate rambling I'd heard from others struggling on the streets. After 2 weeks of seeing him every morning, I started bringing coffee and breakfast sandwiches from the convenience store. Jerry would light up when he saw me coming, not just because of the food, but like he genuinely appreciated having someone treat him as human. We'd talk for 10 or 15 minutes before I headed to my job at the tech company. Served 2 tours in Iraq, Jerry told me one Thursday, unwrapping the sandwich with careful hands. Lost my squad in an IED explosion. Couldn't handle coming home to nothing, you know? Wife left while I was overseas, took the kids. Been trying to get back on my feet ever since, but it's hard when nobody wants to hire someone with PTSD. The story broke my heart, because it sounded like a dozen other veterans I'd read about online. Good men destroyed by war, abandoned by the system they'd served, left to survive on streets in the country they'd fought to protect. I started researching homeless veteran statistics, reading articles that made my stomach turn with anger at how we treated our heroes. Jerry had specific details that made his story believable. He knew military terminology, could describe the layout of forward operating base Liberty in Iraq, talked about specific units and commanders with the casual familiarity of someone who'd actually served there. When he mentioned missing his daughter's birthday while deployed, his voice cracked in a way that seemed genuine. "She turned 6 while I was in Baghdad," he said, staring at his coffee cup. "Promised I'd FaceTime for the party, but we got hit with mortars that day. By the time the all-clear sounded, her party was over. She cried for hours, according to my wife. That was the beginning of the end of my marriage right there. I started looking forward to our morning conversations more than I cared to admit. Jerry was intelligent and articulate when he wasn't putting on the homeless veteran performance for other passers-by. He asked thoughtful questions about my work in software development, seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my relationship problems with Rebecca. "You're a good man, Ryan," he told me one morning after I'd complained about Rebecca's criticism of my spending too much time at work. "She's lucky to have someone who cares about helping people. Not everyone would stop to talk to a guy like me, much less bring food every day. Your kindness means more than you know." That's when I got the idea for the GoFundMe campaign. Jerry needed more help than daily coffee and sandwiches could provide. He needed enough money to get cleaned up, buy decent clothes, find temporary housing while he looked for work. A real chance to rebuild his life instead of just surviving day by day on charity and spare change. I spent hours crafting the perfect campaign description, including everything Jerry had told me about his service and struggles. Help Jerry get back on his feet seemed like the right title, simple and direct. I used my phone to take photos of Jerry with his permission, making sure to capture both his dignity and his obvious need for assistance. Jerry was hesitant about being photographed at first. "Don't want to seem like I'm begging," he said, adjusting his worn baseball cap. "Got some pride left, you know." But when I explained how the photos would help people connect with his story, he agreed. He even combed his hair and straightened his shirt, trying to look as presentable as possible. "Jerry is a 43-year-old Army veteran who served our country with honor in Iraq," I wrote. "After losing his squad and suffering from PTSD, he's been living on the streets for 3 years. He's not asking for handouts, just a chance to get back on his feet and rebuild his life. Every dollar helps him take steps toward independence and stability." I set the goal at $5,000, figuring that would cover first month's rent, security deposit, basic clothes, and some groceries while Jerry looked for work. It seemed like a reasonable amount that wouldn't overwhelm potential donors, but would make a real difference in his life. I shared the link on my social media accounts and asked friends to spread the word. The response shocked me completely. Within 24 hours, we'd raised $800. By the end of the first week, donations had climbed past $3,000. Local friends were sharing the campaign, adding their own stories about seeing Jerry around the neighborhood and appreciating his polite demeanor. The momentum was building faster than I'd ever expected. My coworker Amanda shared the campaign on her Facebook page, writing a long post about how impressed she was that I was helping a homeless veteran. "This is what community looks like," she wrote. "Ryan Thompson is showing us all how to be better neighbors." The post got shared dozens of times by her friends and family across 3 states. Jerry was amazed when I showed him the donation total on my phone. His eyes actually filled with tears as he scrolled through the messages of support from complete strangers wishing him well and thanking him for his service. "I can't believe people care this much," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought everyone had just forgotten about guys like me." the comments section of the GoFundMe page filled with heartfelt messages from veterans, military families, and civilians who'd been touched by Jerry's story. "Thank you for your service," appeared hundreds of times. People shared their own stories about family members who'd struggled with PTSD, homelessness, and readjustment after military service. Then, Channel 7 News picked up the story. The reporter, Maria Santos, interviewed both Jerry and me outside the apartment complex, focusing on the community response to a local veteran in need. Jerry was articulate and dignified on camera, talking about his hopes for the future and his gratitude for everyone's generosity. The segment aired during the evening news, and everything exploded overnight. Jerry seemed nervous during the interview, fidgeting with his hands and avoiding direct eye contact with the camera. When Maria asked about his military service, he gave vague answers about classified operations and dangerous missions. I attributed his discomfort to PTSD and camera shyness, not suspicion about his story's authenticity. Donations poured in from across the state and beyond. People were sharing the GoFundMe link on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, adding their own commentary about supporting our veterans. The total climbed past $10,000, then $20,000, then kept rising as more news outlets picked up the story. Jerry had become a symbol for homeless veterans everywhere. Local businesses started reaching out, offering Jerry job interviews and temporary housing. The VFW Post downtown invited him to their next meeting, promising to help connect him with other veterans and support services. A dental office offered free treatment to help him look presentable for job interviews. Everything was falling into place perfectly, but Jerry seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. He started showing up later in the mornings, sometimes not until I was already leaving for work. When reporters came by looking for follow-up interviews, he'd disappear around the back of the building until they gave up and left. His behavior was becoming erratic and suspicious. "Too much too fast," Jerry explained when I found him hiding behind the dumpster one morning. "Never had this many people paying attention to me before. Makes me nervous, you know? What if I mess it up? What if I let everyone down?" I reassured him that nobody expected perfection, that people just wanted to see him succeed. I understood his hesitation and tried to shield him from the most aggressive media requests. The story had taken on a life of its own, with news outlets calling my office trying to reach Jerry through me. I started screening his calls and scheduling interviews only when he felt ready for them. The money had reached $35,000 by then, far beyond anything either of us had imagined. The pressure was affecting me too. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from the GoFundMe app, social media mentions, and interview requests. Rebecca complained that I was spending more time managing Jerry's campaign than focusing on our relationship. "You're obsessed with this homeless guy," she said during dinner. "It's like he's become your full-time job." That's when things began to unravel. Jerry missed 2 important job interviews that had been set up through the campaign publicity. The first was with a construction company whose owner had served in Vietnam and wanted to help a fellow veteran. The second was at a warehouse where the manager specifically requested to meet Jerry after seeing the news coverage. When I asked him about missing the interviews, Jerry gave vague excuses about feeling sick or not being ready for the pressure. "Wasn't feeling right," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Stomach was acting up. Couldn't handle meeting new people yesterday." His explanations felt hollow, like he was making them up on the spot. I started noticing other inconsistencies in Jerry's behavior. Some mornings he'd seem genuinely hungry and grateful for the breakfast sandwich. Other days he'd barely touch the food, like he'd already eaten somewhere else. His clothes were sometimes cleaner than they should have been for someone sleeping rough every night. The GoFundMe account was set up to transfer funds directly to Jerry once we verified his identity and bank information. But every time I brought up the paperwork, he found reasons to delay. First, he needed to get a new ID. Then he had to figure out how banks worked. Then he wasn't sure about the tax implications. Reasonable concerns, but frustrating when donors were asking for updates. "Don't want the government taking a big chunk," Jerry said when I pressed him about setting up a bank account. "Heard they can tax charity money sometimes. Maybe we should wait until I talk to someone who knows about these things." I offered to help him find a free tax preparation service, but he kept postponing those appointments too. 3 days after the campaign hit $40,000, Jerry vanished completely. I went to his usual spot Monday morning with coffee and found nothing but an empty piece of cardboard blowing in the wind. I searched the entire neighborhood, checked with local shelters and soup kitchens, even filed a missing person report with the police. Jerry had disappeared without taking any of the money. The desk sergeant who took my report seemed skeptical about the whole situation. "Homeless people move around," Officer Daniels said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "Maybe he got spooked by all the attention and decided to try his luck somewhere else. Happens more often than you'd think, especially when there's money involved." But Jerry's disappearance felt wrong. He'd been excited about the possibilities the campaign money could provide, talking about getting his own apartment and maybe taking classes to learn new job skills. Why would he run away just when his dreams were finally within reach? The backlash started immediately. Donors who'd contributed hundreds or thousands of dollars demanded to know where their money went and why the beneficiary had disappeared. My social media accounts filled with angry messages calling me a scammer who'd invented a fake homeless veteran to steal from generous people. Death threats appeared in my inbox from people convinced I was laughing at their gullibility. "You're a piece of shit con artist," read one typical message. I donated $500 because my son died in Afghanistan, and I thought I was helping a real veteran. Hope you rot in hell for stealing from Gold Star families. The vitriol was overwhelming, coming from people who'd been praising my kindness just days earlier. Channel 7 News ran a follow-up story titled, "Local GoFundMe Campaign Raises Questions," that made me look like either an incompetent fool or a deliberate fraud. Maria Santos interviewed angry donors who felt betrayed by Jerry's disappearance and suspicious about my role in the whole situation. The segment included my awkward attempts to explain what had happened. My employer saw the news coverage and placed me on administrative leave pending their own investigation. "We need to make sure this situation doesn't reflect poorly on the company," my supervisor explained. "Until we understand what happened with this charity fraud situation, you'll need to stay home." The implication was clear. I was suspected of criminal activity. GoFundMe froze the account while they conducted their review, leaving $44,000 in donated money trapped in digital limbo. Legal experts on news programs debated whether this qualified as fraud and what recourse donors might have. Online vigilantes started digging into my personal life, posting my address and phone number on forums dedicated to exposing scammers and con artists. The harassment escalated quickly. People drove by my apartment building at all hours, honking horns and shouting accusations. Someone spray-painted "scammer" across my car windshield. My mailbox filled with angry letters from donors who wanted their money back. The stress was destroying my health and my relationship with Rebecca. My girlfriend Rebecca couldn't handle the pressure and moved back in with her parents. "I can't be with someone who's either this gullible or this criminal," she said while packing her clothes. "Either way, it reflects badly on my judgment." Friends stopped returning my calls. My landlord received complaints from other tenants about the reporters and angry protesters gathering outside our building. That's when the other Jerrys appeared. First one, then three, then half a dozen men claiming to be the real homeless veteran from my campaign. Each had slightly different stories about their military service and current situation, but all insisted they were the person donors had intended to help. Some had fake military documents, others brought friends to vouch for their identity. The most convincing was a man named Gerald Kowalski, who showed up at Channel 7 with what appeared to be authentic discharge papers and photos of himself in military uniform. He claimed I'd stolen his story and image to create a fake campaign, pointing out subtle differences between his appearance and the Jerry I'd photographed. When reporters compared the pictures side by side, the differences were obvious. Gerald's story was compelling because he had documentation that seemed to support his claims. Military ID cards, medical records showing treatment for PTSD, even letters from his ex-wife that matched details Jerry had shared with me. But his physical appearance was different enough that it raised more questions than it answered about who was telling the truth. "That Ryan guy took pictures of me without permission," Gerald told Maria Santos during his interview. "Stole my whole life story and used it to make himself look like a hero. I've been homeless for 3 years, just like he wrote in that campaign. The money people donated was meant for me, not some fake person he invented." Gerald filed a lawsuit demanding access to the GoFundMe money, claiming it rightfully belonged to him as the real homeless veteran. 2 other men filed similar suits. Legal battles erupted over which Jerry was authentic and who deserved the donations. Meanwhile, the original Jerry remained missing, leaving everyone to wonder if he'd ever been real at all. The legal proceedings were a nightmare of depositions, document reviews, and expert testimony about photo analysis and military records verification. Each claimant had supporters who believed their version of events, creating factions of donors who fought bitterly in online forums about which Jerry deserved their contributions. My lawyer, David Kim, tried to establish a timeline that would prove I'd acted in good faith when creating the campaign. We gathered security camera footage from my apartment building showing Jerry in his usual spot, credit card records proving I'd bought him food regularly, and witness statements from neighbors who'd seen our morning interactions. But the evidence was circumstantial at best. Anyone could have positioned themselves outside my building pretending to be homeless. The food purchases proved I'd given someone breakfast, not that the recipient was a genuine veteran in need. My good intentions were meaningless if the entire foundation of the campaign was built on lies. The FBI got involved when donors from multiple states filed complaints about interstate fraud. Agent Ramirez was a serious woman in her 40s who'd worked financial crimes for over a decade. She interviewed me for 3 hours, recording everything while other agents searched my apartment for evidence of conspiracy or criminal intent. "We've traced the Jerry Henderson identity back through multiple cities," Agent Ramirez explained, showing me a folder thick with documents. "Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, same appearance, same story, same veteran background. Different GoFundMe campaigns in each location, all organized by well-meaning locals who thought they were helping a homeless veteran." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Maps spread across the conference table showed Jerry's path across the Midwest over 4 years, leaving a trail of charitable fraud in his wake. Each city had a similar story. Sympathetic local creates campaign for homeless veteran, money gets raised, Jerry disappears with the funds. Total take across 4 years, over $200,000, Agent Ramirez continued. Each time he'd spend weeks or months establishing credibility with his mark, learn their schedule, their personality, their weak spots, then position himself where they'd see him daily and develop a relationship based on carefully constructed sympathy. I stared at surveillance photos showing Jerry outside apartment buildings and office complexes in different cities, always wearing the same military fatigues, always carrying the same cardboard sign. The federal investigation had been building for 2 years, following reports from fraud victims across multiple states who'd fallen for identical scams. The real Gerald Kowalski died in Afghanistan in 2011, Agent Ramirez revealed. Jerry Henderson stole his identity, memorized his service record, even got facial reconstruction surgery to match his appearance in military photos. He's been using dead soldiers' identities to run veteran charity scams for over a decade. The medical records were horrifying. Plastic surgery bills showing gradual transformation of Jerry's face to match photographs of deceased veterans, dental work to alter his bite pattern, hair transplants to change his hairline, even colored contact lenses to match different eye colors. He'd physically transformed himself into a professional fraud, but the worst revelation was still coming. Agent Ramirez opened another folder, this one filled with surveillance photos that made my stomach turn. Children, some as young as 12, in situations no child should ever experience. Hotel rooms, warehouses, private homes where innocence was stolen and sold to the highest bidders. The money from your GoFundMe campaign didn't disappear into Jerry's personal accounts, Agent Ramirez said, her voice heavy with disgust. It went directly to funding a human trafficking operation that's been moving children across state lines for commercial sexual exploitation. Your kindness directly financed the abuse of dozens of kids who will never be the same. Financial records showed the money trail with devastating clarity. GoFundMe transfers to shell companies to offshore accounts to human trafficking operations. Every dollar donated by well-meaning strangers had been converted into tools for destroying children's lives. The photos showed children's faces that would haunt my nightmares forever. Kids who should have been in school, playing with friends, living normal lives. Instead, they'd been commodified, bought and sold like livestock, because I'd been stupid enough to trust a professional manipulator who played on my emotions and patriotic guilt. Jerry Henderson, whose real name is Marcus Vega, has been arrested along with 12 associates in what we're calling Operation False Flag, Agent Ramirez explained. The trafficking ring was operating in 6 states, using charity fraud to finance their activities. Your campaign was their biggest single funding source. The scope of the organization was staggering. Prosecutors had evidence of over 200 child victims trafficked over 8 years, generating millions of dollars in revenue. The charity fraud provided clean money that couldn't be traced back to sex trafficking, allowing the operation to appear legitimate to banks and law enforcement. I wanted to vomit. Every dollar donated by kind-hearted strangers who'd wanted to help a veteran had instead gone toward destroying children's lives. The people who'd shared my GoFundMe link, the businesses that had offered Jerry jobs, the news reporters who'd covered the story, we'd all been unwitting accomplices in something monstrous. The legal proceedings stretched for months while prosecutors built their case against the trafficking ring. I testified about Jerry's manipulation tactics and how convincingly he'd played the homeless veteran role. Defense attorneys tried to paint me as either a co-conspirator or criminally negligent in my failure to verify Jerry's background before raising money. During cross-examination, defense lawyers attacked my credibility ruthlessly. Isn't it true, Mr. Thompson, that you never verified Jerry's military service before creating your fundraising campaign? They asked. Isn't it true that you collected money from the public based on nothing more than stories told by a stranger on the street? I had no good answers. Everything they said was technically correct. I had been gullible and careless. I had raised money without proper verification. The fact that I'd been manipulated by a professional con artist didn't absolve me of responsibility for the consequences of my actions. Media coverage destroyed what remained of my reputation. Conservative outlets blamed me for being a naive liberal who'd been duped by obvious lies. Liberal outlets criticized me for not doing proper due diligence before launching a charitable campaign. Both sides agreed I was some combination of stupid, careless, and complicit in serious crimes. The comment sections of news articles about the case filled with vicious attacks on my character. This idiot funded child trafficking because he was too lazy to check if his homeless friend was actually a veteran, read one typical response. Should go to prison along with the rest of them for being so criminally stupid. The GoFundMe money was eventually distributed to organizations that actually help homeless veterans, after legal fees ate up nearly a third of the total. Donors never got their money back, but at least it finally went to legitimate causes. The irony wasn't lost on me that real veterans benefited from fake veteran charity fraud, though not in any way anyone had intended. I lost my job permanently when the company decided my association with the trafficking case made me a liability. Potential employers found news articles about my involvement whenever they Googled my name, making it impossible to find work in my field. I had to move back in with my parents and take a job at a call center to pay my legal bills. Marcus Vega, the man I'd known as Jerry, was convicted on multiple federal charges including fraud, identity theft, and human trafficking. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with 11 of his associates. The 12th associate, a woman named Linda Chen, who'd helped coordinate the child trafficking, died in custody before trial under suspicious circumstances. During the sentencing hearing, I sat in the courtroom listening to victim impact statements from children whose lives had been destroyed by the organization my kindness had funded. Their testimonies were devastating, describing years of abuse that my donated money had helped facilitate. The judge made sure I understood the connection between my actions and their suffering. While Mr. Thompson may not have intended to fund human trafficking, Judge Williams said, his failure to exercise basic due diligence in verifying the recipient of charitable donations contributed directly to the harm suffered by these victims. Good intentions do not excuse willful ignorance when vulnerable people pay the price. One victim, a girl who'd been trafficked from age 13 to 16, looked directly at me during her statement. Every time I was hurt, I knew it was because people like you gave money to people like him without caring enough to make sure it was real, she said. Your kindness cost me 3 years of my life that I'll never get back. But the final twist came from Marcus Vega himself as he was led away in shackles. He looked directly at me across the courtroom and smiled before speaking words that changed everything I thought I knew about this case. Tell Danny I'm sorry it took so long to get even, he called out. Your sister should have minded her own business. Danny was my sister's name. She'd died in a car accident 5 years ago, or so I'd been told. Agent Ramirez found me in the courthouse hallway afterward, her expression grim. We need to talk about your sister, she said quietly. The accident that killed her might not have been an accident. Marcus Vega has been planning revenge against your family for a very long time. The investigation into Danny's death revealed details that had been overlooked or suppressed by local police. Skid marks that didn't match the official accident report, witness statements that contradicted the timeline, evidence of vehicle tampering that hadn't been properly investigated because the case was closed so quickly. The final revelation broke me completely. Danny hadn't died in a random car crash. She'd been working as a social worker specializing in child protection services, investigating reports of abuse and trafficking. Her case files showed she'd been closing in on a major trafficking ring when her car went off the road during a supposedly routine drive home from work. Danny's notes, preserved in evidence storage, showed she'd been tracking a group using charity fraud to fund trafficking operations. She'd identified Marcus Vega as a key figure and was preparing to testify before a grand jury when she died. Her death had allowed the trafficking ring to continue operating for 5 additional years, destroying countless more lives in the process. Marcus Vega had been one of the men she was investigating, using his veteran charity scams to fund child trafficking operations even then. Danny had identified him as a key figure and was preparing to testify before a grand jury when her car went off the road. Her death had allowed the trafficking ring to continue operating for 5 additional years. My act of kindness toward a homeless veteran hadn't been random at all. Marcus Vega had spent years tracking my family, learning our routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity for revenge. He'd positioned himself outside my apartment building, knowing exactly how I'd react to a homeless veteran's story. Every emotion he'd manipulated had been part of an elaborate plan. The FBI found evidence that Marcus had been surveilling me for over a year before our first meeting. Photos of me leaving for work, coming home from the grocery store, walking with Rebecca to nearby restaurants. He'd studied my schedule, my personality, my soft spots with the thoroughness of a professional predator. Every conversation we'd had was recorded on a device hidden in his jacket. Hours of audio showing how he'd gradually built trust by sharing fabricated personal details and asking seemingly innocent questions about my family, my job, my relationship. He'd mapped my psychology as carefully as any therapist. I quit my job and moved across the country, but the knowledge of what I'd unwittingly participated in follows me everywhere. Every news story about missing children makes me wonder if my donations contributed to their disappearance. Every homeless veteran I see makes me question whether they're genuine or another Marcus Vega waiting to exploit someone else's compassion. The nightmares started immediately after the trial ended. I'd dream about the children in those FBI photos, see their faces in every crowd, hear their voices calling my name in accusation. Therapy helped somewhat, but the guilt was too deep to ever fully heal. I'd funded the destruction of innocence while believing I was doing good. 2 years later, I volunteer at a legitimate organization that helps identify and rescue trafficking victims, trying to balance the scales of justice, even though nothing can undo the harm my kindness caused. The children in those FBI photos visit my dreams nightly, reminding me that good intentions without wisdom can become weapons in the hands of evil people who understand exactly how to exploit our desire to help others. The organization, called Safe Harbor, runs on strict verification protocols that would have prevented my mistake. Every case gets investigated by trained professionals, every story gets fact-checked through official channels, every dollar raised gets tracked through legitimate banking systems. It's what I should have done from the beginning. My work there is part penance, part prevention. I help train other volunteers to recognize the warning signs I missed, to ask the hard questions I never thought to ask. We've prevented 3 fraud attempts since I started volunteering, each one bearing similarities to the Marcus Vega operation. Evil learns from success, but so does justice.